One of the strongest entities in the Fear and Hunger franchise is an old god named Gro-goroth. This powerful being encompasses the ideals of destruction and sacrifice, inspiring mortals to ever-escalating forms of ultra-violence to worship him. He has a strong influence in the Fear and Hunger franchise, and inspires terror and a crazed aggression in mankind. But who exactly is this god, and what are his motives? In this video we'll explain who Gro-goroth is. But before we get into this video is brought to you by me. Yes, me. You can now become a channel member and join the Spook Gang by clicking the join button down below, which will give you access to member only videos where I will be posting Fear and Hunger videos that aren't exactly algorithm friendly. You also get a pinecone next to your name and access to emojis. All of this helps out the channel and my ability to make more videos like this, so if that sounds good to you, click the join button in the description below to gain access. With all that being said, let's get into the terrifying truth of Gro-goroth. In the Fear and Hunger universe, old gods represent and embody concepts in their purest form, and thus occupy a vague definition of what exactly an old god is. What separates the old gods from the new gods is their existence being marked since the beginning of time, which is where they get the moniker of being a old god. As early as the ancient period of mankind, old gods have been documented, one of them being Gro-goroth, who primarily represents the concept of destruction and sacrifice. Mortals may perceive Gro-goroth as a monster or some sort of malevolent entity. Other people would argue that Gro-goroth is merely a universal law and isn't necessarily evil or monstrous, but rather embodies entropy in its purest form. The origin of Gro-goroth is shrouded in mystery. However, scholars have referred to the origins of Gro-goroth alongside the other old gods to come from a period of time called the Green Hue. The concept of the green hue is vague and hard to quantify, but functionally it is some sort of primordial soup before planets and mortal consciousness as well as societies ever came to be. In this green hue, the old gods came along and started making the building blocks for reality, and as such, lesser beings were made. In an ending of Fear and Hunger, where the players are transported to a place known as the Void, they encounter beings such as dinosaurs, as well as what looks to be primordial humanity in its rawest form. Beings that have vague semblance to mankind, but aren't quite developed yet. This void area that you get to experience in the end of Fear and Hunger is speculated to be some sort of representation of the green hue and the origin of Gro-goroth. The power of Gro-goroth is speculated to be stronger during the early periods of mortal life. One can observe this shift from the primitive eras of mankind, where human sacrifice was the norm, which fell out of favor over time to the point where we are now in the 20th century in Fear and Hunger 2, where ritualistic human sacrifice has fallen out of favor in place of more civilized societal practices. In the material world, Gro-goroth is and has always been represented as a threat to humanity, a formidable manifestation of danger. His depictions and illustrations by mortals have shown him to be an impossibly large, towering, muscular being, with sacrificed human bodies adorning his form. He proudly displays these dead bodies as trophies, and all of this communicates that humanity by and large perceives Gro-goroth as this monster. However, this ultra-threatening appearance he has is somewhat misleading, as it's not necessarily Gro-goroth himself who does the destroying, but the mortals who are under him. The influence of Gro-goroth is only materialized by the participation of mortals, and is thus reliant on mortals to achieve his goals of destruction and sacrifice. As such, he rewards them with empowering mortals who do his bidding with some supernatural gifts. One gains affinity with Gro-goroth by sacrificing a mortal life on a ritual circle in his name. After blood is spilled, Gro-goroth imbues the supplicant with power, and this power is known as blood magic. Being able to cast various spells such as Hurting, a concentrated red portal that rips away material from our world, sending it into a vortex to another dimension. Typically, the Hurting spell dismembers limbs by tearing into the flesh and sending it elsewhere. For the victim, it would be like if part of your body just disappeared, leaving an open wound where the flesh once was. There are also pyromancy spells of Gro-goroth, letting the spellcaster ignite air around a concentrated target at will, spontaneously combusting creatures as they please. One other noteworthy aspect of blood magic is the ability to create thralls out of flesh to do your bidding, famous examples being necromancy, which animates the dead to mindlessly serve you, as well as blood golems, where the spellcaster uses some of his or her own spilled blood to create a golem out of congealed blood to fight alongside them in combat. All of this is needless to say that fighting against a wielder of blood magic is quite a terrifying proposition. Thus, various groups have utilized this power from Gro-goroth, entities such as the Yellow Mages. A notable example of a Yellow Mage being Osar, who is a contestant that participated in the Festival of Termina in Fear and Hunger 2. The worship of Gro-goroth plays a large part in the setting of Fear and Hunger 1. The dungeon where the entire game is featured was merely a front to sacrifice bodies to Gro-goroth. Throughout this dungeon, which allegedly was designed to store prisoners, there are numerous ritual chambers with the sigil of Gro-goroth painted on the floor. These chambers were used to sacrifice prisoners to gain affinity, and the consequences of which can be found throughout the dungeon. Various discarded and used bodies can be found dotted around the dungeon. Typically, the prisoners that were transported to the dungeon were merely just sacrificial fodder for Gro-goroth. It's fair to speculate that what went on in the dungeon while the inhabitants were quote-unquote normal was a systemic slaughter of captives to please and gain the favour of the Old God Gro-gorroth. That is not to say that Gro-goroth doesn't make a feature in Fear and Hunger 2 either. Underneath Evil, in the cave networks, one can find a statue depicting Gro-goroth, with various bodies strewn around the effigy. The imagery of the scene almost looks like the statue of Gro-goroth is a tree, sprouting out of what would be the soil. However, in this case, the bodies on the floor are the soil. The image is quite curious, as various texts documenting Gro-goroth describes his destruction as merely just one side of nature. As destruction is quite literally required for creation, one can begin to understand that Gro-goroth isn't entirely negative. One quite literal example of this being the case are trees dying, decomposing, then turning into soil, which is then used for new trees to grow in and so on. This cycle of life requires both destruction and creation, which is why it makes more sense than some would initially think that the other side of Gro-goroth is Sylvian, the god of creation, love and fertility. Despite these two old gods seemingly being mortal enemies, they are entirely necessary for each other's existence, and thus can be viewed as a yin and yang relationship. Both Gro-goroth and Sylvian would then create Venushka, for lack of a better term, their child, who is spoken to be the god of nature, quite literally encompassing both sides of them being destruction and creation. Despite Gro-goroth having a very monstrous depiction, it would be wrong to conflate Gro-goroth with the sulfur god, despite having some similarities on the surface. Yes, both gods have sacrifice and destruction as part of their agenda. However, Gro-goroth demands destruction for the sake of creation and maintaining somewhat of a cosmic balance, whereas the sulfur god demands destruction yet simply just to cause suffering, with sacrificial rituals done in the name of the sulfur god being far more sadistic and painful to the victims than the sacrifices done in the name of Gro-goroth. Followers of the sulfur god would sacrifice someone purely for a hedonistic and sadistic pleasure, which is notably different to what the followers of Gro-goroth would do. However, this is not to say that Gro-goroth is necessarily good and the sulfur god is evil. It's more that Gro-goroth is morally neutral, whereas the sulfur god is truly a manifestation of evil in its purest form. One interesting aspect about Gro-goroth is that during the fight with his avatar in the Gauntlet of Fear and Hunger 1, he merely uses a weakened trace of his power to fight you. Despite being an arrogant god of destruction, known as the Man-Eater, he still has some sense of fair play, and is amused by the challenge that you bring him. The sulfur god, on the other hand, would just give you no chance at all and condemn you to a lifetime of torture. There would be no pretense of a fair fight with the Sulphur God, whereas Gro-goroth would at least give you a fighting chance, which is quite a unique characterization. For all the misery and pain that Gro-goroth and his followers have caused, there is always another side to destruction. As the old makes way for the new, the cycle of life must go on, and destruction is what keeps the cycle going. If you want to find out more about the setting of Fear and Hunger in general, check out this video I made about the dungeon in Fear and Hunger 1, which is on screen here.